It was a cold winter evening. The streets of the city were bustling with people wrapped in thick coats, scarves, and gloves, rushing to their warm homes. The shops lining the roads had their bright lights on, showcasing expensive clothes, jewelry, and food items. Yet amidst this world of warmth and comfort, there was a man who had neither. His name was Jacob. Once he had a good job, a home, a family, but life had been cruel to him. Misfortunes struck one after another. His company shut down, leaving him unemployed, his savings drained within months, unable to pay rent. He lost his apartment and soon found himself on the streets for months. He searched for work, but every door closed in his face. Companies didn't want to hire a man who looked like he hadn't eaten in days. The few shelters in the city were always full, leaving Jacob to sleep on cold benches or in dark alleys. Hunger was his constant companion. His clothes were torn, his shoes barely holding together. Yet, through all this, he held on to one thing. Hope. Deep down, he believed that someday life would take a turn for the better. On this particular evening, Jacob sat on the sidewalk, leaning against the cold brick wall. His stomach growled from hunger. He reached into his pocket and felt the single-dollar bill, the last bit of money he had left. He had been holding on to it for days, unsure whether to spend it on a piece of bread or save it for an emergency. But what bigger emergency was there than starving? As he debated what to do, he noticed a woman sitting a few feet away. She looked worse than him. Her clothes were nothing but rags. Her arms wrapped around her frail body for warmth. She held a sign in shaky hands that read, "Please help me hungry, homeless and alone." Jacob watched as people walked past her. Some didn't even glance in her direction. Others looked at her with disgust as if her presence was an inconvenience to their perfect evening. Jacob's heart ached. He knew that feeling all too well, the feeling of being invisible, of being unwanted. He hesitated for a moment, then without thinking further, he stood up and walked towards her. She looked up at him, her eyes sunken and tired. He could see the pain in them, the hopelessness. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said softly. She blinked in surprise, as if no one had spoken to her in days. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his last dollar. "Here, take this." Her eyes widened. "Sir, you look like you need this more than me." Jacob shook his head with a weak smile. "No, I can manage for a little longer. You need it more." The woman's lips trembled as she took the dollar, her fingers cold to the touch. "Thank you." She whispered, tears pooling in her eyes. Jacob simply nodded and turned away, walking back to his spot. He sat down, feeling a strange sense of peace. Despite his hunger, despite his struggles, he had done something good today. He closed his eyes and let out a deep breath. The wind howled around him, but for some reason he didn't feel as cold anymore. The night passed slowly. Jacob curled up in a dark alley, trying to keep himself warm. His body ached from exhaustion, but sleep did not come easily. Hunger gnawed at his stomach. His mind wandered to his past, the days when he had a warm bed, a full meal, a loving family. How had it all gone so wrong? He sighed, pushing the thoughts away. Dwelling on the past wouldn't change his present. As dawn broke, Jacob woke up to the sound of footsteps. He sat up, rubbing his eyes. A man stood before him, dressed in a sleek black coat. His shoes polished, his hair neatly combed. Jacob immediately felt self-conscious in his torn clothes. The man crouched down to his level, offering a small smile. "Good morning." Jacob looked at him cautiously. "Morning. I saw what you did last night," the man said, his voice calm. Jacob frowned. "I don't understand." The man gestured toward the woman from before. "I was watching from across the street. I saw you give away your last dollar." Jacob's breath caught in his throat. He didn't expect anyone to notice, let alone care. It was nothing. He mumbled, "She needed it more." The man studied him for a moment, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an envelope. He handed it to Jacob, who took it hesitantly. "Open it," the man urged. Jacob carefully tore the envelope open. His eyes widened when he saw the check. Inside $10,000, his hand shook. "Sir, I don't understand." The man smiled. "Many years ago, I was in your place, homeless, hungry, without hope. One night, a stranger showed me kindness. He gave me food and shelter, and it changed my life. I swore that if I ever got back on my feet, I would do the same for others." Jacob's eyes welled up with tears. "I don't know what to say." "Just promise me one thing," the man said, "when you have the chance to help someone else do it without hesitation." Jacob nodded, his heart pounding with emotion. The man patted his shoulder, then stood up and walked away. Disappearing into the morning crowd, Jacob clutched the check close to his chest. He had gone to sleep last night with nothing and woken up with a miracle. That day, he found a small diner and bought himself a warm meal. For the first time in weeks, he felt full and satisfied. He used the money wisely, renting a small room, finding clean clothes, applying for jobs. Within a month, he had secured a stable job enough to support himself. But he never forgot the lesson he had learned from that experience. Years passed. Jacob built a new life for himself. He worked hard, saved money, and eventually started his own small business. But he never forgot the kindness he received. He made it his mission to help others whenever he could. Sometimes it was offering a meal to someone in need. Sometimes it was simply listening to their story. One evening, as he walked home from work, he saw a young man sitting on the sidewalk shivering from the cold, his clothes torn, his face weary. Jacob stopped, reached into his pocket, and pulled out some money. "Here," he said, offering it to the young man. The man looked up in shock. "Sir, I can't take this. You need it more." Jacob smiled warmly. "No, I can manage for a little longer." "You need it more?" The young man hesitated, but then took the money with tears in his eyes. "Thank you, sir. Thank you so much." Jacob nodded as he walked away. He knew that feeling. He knew what it was like to be at the lowest point, and he knew that sometimes all it took was one act of kindness to change everything. Life had come full circle, and Jacob was now the one giving back, just like the stranger who had once helped him. Because he understood now, generosity isn't about wealth. It's about the heart, and sometimes the smallest act of kindness can bring the greatest reward.